Hello, my name is Brendan O'Toole, and I would like to welcome you to Portal Magazine's Portfolio Series, where we have readings and interviews with student writers and published authors from Vancouver Island University and the world. I would also like to acknowledge the Snuneymuxw, Quw'utsun, and Tla'amin, whose traditional lands we study and learn on. Portal 2022 is being designed by Natasha Rosmarnowicz and published by students from VIU's Creative Writing Department's Portal class. Today I have with me writer and professor Niel Surkan. Niel Surkan was born in Penticton, BC. He is the author of the poetry collections Unbecoming and On High, both from McGill Queen's University Press, and the chapbooks Their Queer Tenderness and Supernatural. His poems and reviews have appeared in numerous Canadian literary magazines. Niel earned a PhD in English from the University of Calgary in 2021 after completing an MA Crew at the University of Toronto and a BA Honours at the University of Victoria. He currently lives and teaches in Nanaimo on the traditional and unceded territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nations with Luca, Edie, and Lloyd. All right. Hello, I would like to welcome Niel Surkan to our Portals Portfolio series, where we will do some readings and a short little interview. Thanks, Niel, for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored to be here. Especially, I just moved to Nanaimo to start teaching here, and it still feels kind of, I don't know, vacuous or empty. And this is a good way to make friendships or at least meet some folks.
Yeah, I know. We were talking with one of one of my classmates yesterday, and they lived in Montreal for a long time, New Orleans for a long time, and now here on the island, and just how different that is. I mean, I've grown up on the island, so for me this always feels kind of like home. But if you're not coming from here, it is an island. I always forget that. So Niel, you have your new book Unbecoming just released. Do you want to talk a little bit about that before we get you to read something from it?
Yeah, for sure. This is my second full-length collection. And so the first one, called On a High, also came out with McGill Queen's University Press. This one is thinking about the word unbecoming kind of two ways. So the first way is that the act of unbecoming, if we could posit that that's a kind of verb or an action, is the work of kind of transforming in a way that might be somewhat like awkward or strange or in a new direction that potentially breaks away from the kinds of transformations that we're maybe taught to do as children by our families. So it's kind of thinking about living in a new way. And the impetus for that is becoming a father myself and what I want that to kind of look like. So that's the one side. The other side is there's this word unbecoming that means kind of like ugly or awkward.
Oh yeah.
And so kind of like not fitting in, right? So it's kind of about the ugly or awkward kinds of transformations that we might feel compelled to make in our lives, specifically around becoming more accountable and maybe thinking about our complicities a little bit more. So that's kind of the root of the book. And it was edited by Carolyn Smart again at Queen's University. And I always like to just really shout out to Carolyn, how grateful I am for her support and editor work.
Oh, fantastic. Would you like to read a poem from it for us?
I'll read you one called Unbecoming. Why not, right?
Yeah.
Let's just like set the definition in action. And then I'll read you maybe one called Bewilderment, if that sounds okay.
That sounds totally good.
Unbecoming. Night advances like molasses, creeping over the carton white mountains. Next to this foreclosed casino, a dormant bog shallow breathes. Mealy ornamental apples snick in spindly, frost-chalked trees potted around the patio. Across the valley, a last worker exits the quarry, headlights glowing between shale piles like a skull placed on a candle. We're due for some luminous thinking, this very early snow and all. But why plan when you can gamble? There's only one guarantee: nests naked without leaves, vomit on the paving stones. The world appears, exceeds, and unbecomes too quickly for certainty, just enough for love to burn with cold, then go so numb. Blackening toe will salvage or cut tomorrow.
Thank you.
So that's unbecoming. Would you like to hear one more? Does that seem like, is this a good time to do that, Brendan?
Yeah, we can do another right now.
Sure. This is a poem called Bewilderment. Kind of the other side of the spectrum. Honestly, it was written when you could still go to the grocery store with an infant without that feeling scary.
Yeah.
So it kind of is marked in time, like a year and a half, 2 years ago, kind of when my son was real tiny, and it was still okay for strangers to come up and touch his hair or whatever. So
ruffle the hair.
Yeah, to ruffle it, right? So this poem's called Bewilderment, and bewilderment is also the first word. Bewilderment does not become a consumer. My son, strapped to my chest, will not remember this grocery run, nor tasting this Chilean peach I'm thumbing for softness. So much displaces in the realms of produce and memory. We feel and feel till someone has to care for us. I hope he will visit. We pass the milk, the sweets, the butcher, all the while he sleeps, which strangers love, stopping to simper. I wonder if their snuffles, their pinching of wrappers, filter through his dreams, his separate dark, those ears that match my brother's. Subtler, subtler beat our hearts down aisles of cluttered glitz.
I really like that one. I think of it as almost like you're experiencing that bewilderment of having this new person in your life and seeing things through their eyes for the first time. Like grocery, I know right now when I go to a grocery store, it's just a grocery store. But I'm sure if I had a newborn strapped to my chest, I'd have a completely different perspective.
Yeah, totally. There's also, for sure, and I love poems as well. So there's kind of that merging there. I think that parenthood is really good at making you feel alien again in the world or defamiliarizing the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always my hope that a poem kind of will do that with language in a similar way, kind of make words weird again, right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like a bumper sticker. But really, like that's kind of the work that I'm really invested in, or that calls me back to poems. I can't really think of, well, there are other areas, but for me, poetry is like the number one field or event or thing to do that when a poem is good, it's because I've never seen it before. The world appears in a new way again.
Yeah.
It is the same as, I don't know, watching a toddler see snow for the first time, or people love to film their kids licking a lemon.
Yeah. And
or
I
whatever it
guess,
is, watching those things get together. Right?
yeah. And in that way, being a poet, you're kind of allowing, you're like sharing that experience, hopefully with other people, and they're seeing it through your eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's such a risk. There's this UK poet that I really love named Jack Underwood, and he talks about how writing poems is kind of like trying to herd jellyfish in someone else's direction. Like you're trying to get these unwieldy tools, i.e., like words and letters, to form some kind of meaning that is like has a semblance of what you meant by the time it gets to the receiver.
Yeah.
And there's like a lot of fuzz in between, right? A lot of things can go wrong, or a lot of misunderstandings can occur, and yet like we have to try, right?
Yeah. Perfect. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your background, how you got into writing and how you got into like poetry, especially?
Yeah, for sure. That's so funny. I actually didn't think about how I would answer a question like that in advance. So off the cuff, I really wanted to be a musician when I was in high school. And something happened around when I was 18, starting out at university and starting to read poetry for the first time in earnest, and starting to appreciate how hard it is. Like just reading it is often feels a little bit inaccessible depending on like what you're being taught, especially in a university setting. And I just fell in love with that difficulty, I think.
Yeah.
and it started to be the thing I daydreamed about when I was supposed to be taking notes, or little things happening in the margins. And it wasn't for about another 10 years or so that I was kind of ready to really let those happenings appear in the world. So that's kind of the poetry side. I grew up in the Okanagan, so which is a much more conservative place than I appreciated at the time. So I think alongside this obsession with writing, that is definitely a core part of my life, there's also kind of in parallel with that, some work of like self-acceptance kind of as well, like especially being like a queer person, trying to figure out how to be authentic in the world. I find that writing is constantly that challenge. It's also for me, like even in a Zoom call, maybe you've noticed it now, it's fun to be playful and joke around and kind of like smirk or whatever. But I really like the work of reading poems of my own or of anyone else's is like one of the most authentic actions that I can really imagine. And so that kind of push to be authentic, even if the poem itself is snarling or smiling or laughing, or grieving, is constantly inspiring to me. So that's kind of like the draw to it. Yeah. So
yeah, you're putting yourself out there in a way that it's and like you said, it's challenging. You don't know if anybody's, well, I find sometimes you don't know if people are going to figure out what you're going for. But you still have that need that you want, you're going to put it out there, and like, this is my authentic self. Let's see if people can accept it. If not, hopefully it at least makes them think a little.
Yeah, those kinds of pushes also toward verification that you are indeed among others, that those relations are being acknowledged on both sides, right? I don't know, I have a constant memory being a child of like driving in the family car, and like, I don't know, someone points out a hawk and then no one else sees it, and like the work of poetry is to be like, was the hawk really there, and does it matter?
Yeah.
What did you miss? This feeling of lacking, is that productive or generative or not? So it really is about kind of like trying to aim between the goalposts, but maybe sometimes making those real wide. It's still and I do also want to say, like, of course, I love trying to be myself in a poem, or to express myself in a poem, but that is always coupled, right, with the persona, or with a constructed kind of voice, and how those kinds of moments of artifice or creation are merging with real experiences is, I think, the most liberating part. To wonder, like, what if it were another way? What if it were so, even if it didn't happen that way? And there are definitely some moments in this book where it's like, what the speaker in the poem is saying happens did not happen. But if it had, like, that'd be sweet or sad. Whatever. Right? So,
Sweet and sad.
Sweet or both. Yeah, sweet and sour.
You mentioned how you wanted to be a musician. Obviously, like poetry, like lyrics, quite similar. Do you still like dabble in music? Do you write songs, or is that kind of like something from the past?
I feel like I'm one of those folks who has like only a particularly deep well, and once it's dry, like I like to be working in one medium. I find that there is similar overlap, like in terms of the kind of creative energy between working on poems, writing songs, and teaching, right? Because it's that work of kind of improvising, or playing on the spot, or riffing, that kind of might create something palatable to others. And so honestly, especially if I'm working on a book, tunes are few and far between. But something I have really loved about being a dad is that, like, singing little kid style jingles is harder to make than it appears. The good ones, like the real hooks that children like, are alien and few and far between. So I've been having a great time trying to like write lullabies, or I don't know, my own weird nursery rhymes for my son. Other than that, right now, not really creating at once on both sides. Also, just because melody in poems, as soon as a poem starts rhyming the way that a song might and still get away with it, it doesn't feel quite the same to me. It doesn't feel as authentic when it's just on the I love melody, I love rhythm, but I'd like it to be hidden a little bit more in these poems, yeah, for sure.
Oh. And so going through the book, obviously we've talked a little bit about like, bringing a child into the world. But I noticed in the book, there's also that theme of like passing on, especially with like grandparents and that type of thing. How do you find that kind of relating to the theme of unbecoming?
Yeah, so the first poem in this collection is a long poem called The Minimum. And it's really meditating on my grandfather's death on my dad's side. And I was present for the kind of the week before he passed. And he kind of just decided to die, I guess you could almost say. And he just refused to eat, kind of, and was very kind of just like stoically decided that it was like time to go. He'd been caring for my grandmother who had dementia for many years and was just kind of fatigued and also kind of like angry and embittered. And that was just watching my father and his brothers grieve and thinking about the kind of man, quote unquote, that I've been like kind of raised to be in, like, or to act like in moments like that, and what it means to be I don't know, performing masculinity in those kinds of events that are so grave, right?
Mhm.
What it means to like show those emotions and also to feel love, I think, and to say that love aloud, because my grandfather refused to do that. He wouldn't say that he loved us when we were leaving the hospital, even if we would say it to him. That was astonishing to me, and something that really, when my son was born, like they kind of go together, just kind of wanting to generate a different kind of relationship than that. And I've seen and really admired the way that my own father has tried to renovate this idea of masculinity in the way that he raised me. Um, and yet there like this possibility of becoming someone different from my father, different from my grandfather, while
Mhm.
also acknowledging that the experiences I've had are connected to who I am, like to how I was raised and like who I am in this family. That was kind of the center of the book, right? So this book also was part of my dissertation for my PhD, and so I really wanted to think about like what it means to have a poem do political work or activist work in the world, and alongside that, there is just that work of being like, so how does one become more self-reflexive, right, about how you were raised, what beliefs you hold, and why, right? And how you might relate to place. And gender really plays hugely in this book as well. This is a book with a lot of men that I have a hard time relating to, but really want to love.
Yeah.
So like all of that kind of is a grief in itself, and so the grief is beyond just the death of grandparents as much as it is also looking to the future, given what that passing means in the past. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Thanks. I'll pivot a little. I want to talk about kind of the writing of a book compared to the writing of a chapbook. And I know that you've published, I think, 2 chapbooks in the past,
Right. Yeah.
and also published 2, collections of poetry. How do you approach them when you're writing a chapbook versus writing, what we see as like a book?
Yeah. It's always kind of just intuitive. I love so the chapbooks that I've written are integrated into the books that have kind of been published toward a broader audience. Lisa Robertson, this poet I love a lot, one time said in a seminar I was in that she kind of sees chapbooks as part of like a friendship economy. Like they have no spine, they're easy to travel with. You
Yeah.
can pass them around and distribute them kind of uh, more efficiently in that way. And so I like to think of that kind of being like a sample pack.
Mhm.
The chapbooks always, like, what's great about them is you can kind of concentrate a single movement a little more, or a single kind of attention into the suite of poems. So whereas Unbecoming, like, because it is something that is also reflective of like 3.5, 4 years of writing, like even though it's like not huge, right? Like still has like the frequencies are mixing. There's more dissonance, more tension. The suites are longer. The movements of thinking are more complex and multifarious. Whereas I love that a chapbook can kind of, my first one is kind of like, given the terrors that we see in the environment, like what kind of people are we? So that first chapbook, Supernatural, is kind of thinking about that. The next one is about like queer friendship, really, their queer tenderness. And it is like, there are poems that are in here that make sense in this collection differently than they do in the context of the chapbook. So that's kind of how I think about it. If you were to watch me editing a book in its full length, what you would always see, and I encourage anyone who is interested in putting together like a suite of poems, either for a chapbook or for a full book, to try this. You put on a headlamp, you print off everything, and then you just spread it out on the floor and start to mix the suite around. I'm not someone who can ever do that on a computer screen. It has to literally span an entire room. So Unbecoming was like almost every room in my house, because I was a pretty small house that I was living in. Their Queer Tenderness, same thing. And it does really help to dim the lights and to focus the headlight and just like let it kind of catch the poems and put them in relation to one another. There has to be this act of like messing around or mucking around until an order appears. And I'll do that 4, 5, 6 times across 9 months or something like that.
Yeah.
Seeing it anew until you catch the kind of subtler echoes. There's still some things like sneak in, right? There'll be a word that repeats and therefore gains a gravity because it is on page 1 and page 12. They start to relate to each other in a different way. In this case, like Unbecoming starts with some breeze blocks and has some more breeze blocks 12 pages later. And to me, that's a lot of breeze blocks, like 2 times.
Yeah.
But that kind of work of associating and compiling is, I think, really exciting. It's also always a moment to savor, right? That before you send it out, before there are potential rejections or potential massive edits, like that you've done something that's yours. And so why not go like spelunking with the words? That's what I recommend.
Yeah. You always have that memory. You're always going to have the memory of the pages on the floor with the headlamp on.
I do it every time now. And it's just, the headlamp is kind of optional, but the pages on the floor you'll see many writers do it, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not like the couch and all the shelves. Like it's just this creation of a landscape of your own words that you get to sit in for a minute. Lasts for an hour, try an organization, then share it with a friend, try it again. It's a communal effort, but that personal time is so cool. It's the best part, I think.
that sounds really fun. I think I'll if I ever do
Give
that,
it a
I'll
try,
probably
right?
end
Yeah,
up doing
like,
that.
Even just do like 5 pages, 3 pages, just kind of noticing how they sit when you move them, right? And they get into your body in a different way.
One final kind of question I want to ask has to do with teaching. So one poem in Unbecoming that really stood out to me was a poetry workshop with medical students.
Oh yeah.
I just thought that it was a really engaging idea of someone like someone in a creative field is standing up and talking to people in a scientific field, and how those ideas just kind of hit blocks with each other. Can you talk about just, I guess, kind of teaching in general, and maybe speak on like talks that you've done before, and I don't know, just kind of get us into your thought process along those lines?
Oh, that's a cool question. Do you think, may I read that poem for you? Do you think that makes sense?
Go for it.
Sure. I wasn't planning to read it, so hopefully I don't muck it up, but I think that, it kind of sets the tone. What you need to know about this poem, for anyone listening out in the void, is that Laura Kaczynski, who is a poet I love, has this really strange embodied poem about a daughter hiding upstairs, listening to her mother talk to an unknown person on the phone. And it's a very strange, unsettling conversation, including like a disembodied tongue is being discussed. It sounds terrifying, actually, for a child to overhear. And so the poem is relaying that memory. And this poem, Poetry Workshop with Medical Students, is a memory of teaching a room full of medical students the poem by Laura Kaczynski, and trying to make sense of like how the poem was working, given the fact that it was surreal. It's obviously surreal. No one has a tongue in the house. Hopefully no one does, right? But like, there was a tongue in the house in the imagined space of the poem. And I was like, whereas I tear up when I read the poem every time, it's gorgeous. The future physicians in the room were a little bit skeptical about the value of a work like that, right? So, and yeah, this poem is about meeting that resistance and maybe pushing back. So I'll read this first and then just talk about second about teaching. But poetry workshop with medical students. Why are we taking these strands of words so seriously? They ask, brows bent like bows under the weight of Laura Kaziski. Who cares what the daughter overheard her mother say on the phone? Do you seriously read this alone and wipe away tears? There's a prescription for that. Good questions, I mutter, arranging my notes. Sketch of the mom ghost's tongue, some arrows. May I ask one in return? Why are you so invested in keeping us alive? Actually, and this also arises out of being the writer in residence in a medical school for a few years back, where I did give a keynote called "Poetry Can't Save a Life," but like, wait, what can it do? Like, what can poetry do? What's the point among these people who are going to like draw people's blood, like catheters, whatever? Like, they're going to like get in people's bodies, and what am I doing? Squiggling around with some language, and like what I constantly try to approach in my teaching methods is kind of the benefit of stretching one's attention and kind of opening one's awareness to experiences that maybe someone hadn't considered before. And I think that's what is great about literature. It's why I love teaching, in particular, students who are not English majors, although, like, of course, English majors are also an absolute treat to interact with, or creative writing students, but students who are a little more skeptical, who have maybe never had a positive reading experience, especially in like the poetic realm, to just kind of like push back on this idea that poetry is only for a certain group of people or a certain community of folks, and rather it's about finding a voice that kind of speaks to you, and also seeing what it feels like to make someone else's voice speak like through you. So a lot of my teaching practice really does revolve around like listening, getting students to read aloud, to notice the way that a poem appears on the page versus how it sonically appears in the room, how it might just hit our ears instead of our eyes, and everywhere in between, right? Trying a little bit of embodiment alongside that. And I think it's just kind of, especially in our like phone realms now, we're doing this over Zoom, like just a tech-centric world, especially given the pandemic, but it feels like it was kind of maybe going that way anyways. I still think there is just like a radical benefit to being in a group of other people, hearing a stranger's words for the first time, and recognizing that the parts we relate to are distinct to who we are as unique individuals, and that there's something spiritually beneficial to that. I think it's physically beneficial to like sit in one place, to hold some pages, smell them, read them aloud, hear them. And I really also do think that it's like more than anything, just that creative work, working that part of the mind does make people better physicians. It does make them like better mathematicians. Makes them better.
It has them thinking in a different way.
Yeah, like it opens up the world anew, especially if one's tasks, excellent tasks, right? Like surgery, like become, I don't know, repetitive over time, right? And there are ways to strangify the world, right? To make it more peculiar and weird that are beneficial or good. Yeah, I think it's good. Anyways, I hope that's happening to someone today listening to these poems.
Well, that is like a perfect transition into what I wanted to kind of end with. You have a live reading coming up.
Yeah, that's right. So I'll be reading so next week I have a couple things going on. I'm reading on Wednesday on Zoom with Knife Fork Book in Toronto, Ontario, and that'll be with the poets Dale Martin Smith and Clara Duplessis. I admire both of them a ridiculous amount. I think it'll be a cool event, but that's more kind of Zoom like this. If anyone's going to be in Vancouver on December 10th, so Friday of next week, I'm going to be reading with some of my poetic heroes at Massey Books in Vancouver, BC. So it's my first live reading in a while. I think that like one takes their mask off to read the poems. So that'll be
I would hope.
right? To get in the room and do it. So just being in a space like that, I always say to students and to anyone who's interested, like if you haven't been to a live poetry reading before, There are bad ones, but sometimes the good ones are the things that you like just never forget. Something about a group of people just actively listening together to something that is often not physically performative. Sometimes it is, but often it's just quite staid and quiet, and yet the words are given priority in the space. And they're usually carefully arranged words, right? Words that took time to kind of come into being in the way that they are. So I'd love to see someone there. Please come up and say hi if you were there.
Perfect. Well, Niel, I would just want to say thank you one last time. The book Unbecoming is available now. Where can we find it?
So if you're at VIU, it should be in the VIU bookstore. I think a couple of copies are getting into window seat books as well, so kind of in the old corridor zone there. Yeah. And then otherwise from the publisher, any supporting local bookstores as well, even asking them to carry it in. That's always like hugely appreciated too, for sure.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for coming on and chatting with me today.
Thanks. Thank you so much for holding this. I'm totally honored to be a part of it. So,
right.
Well.
All right. Thanks, Niel.